Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kausji. Niaga Spotlight takes us through the week in economic analysis and future affairs. Now, today on Future Affairs, the spotlight falls on right to information and governance reform. Malaysia's transparency agenda is entering a new phase. The Government Procurement Bill 2025 was passed in Parliament with 125 votes in favour, introducing for the first time real penalties for rule breaking, including ministers. Now, attention shifts to the next reform on the table, a right to information law, which Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim says will be tabled by the end of this year. Together, these two laws could reshape how public funds are managed. Transparent procurement means predictable systems for investors, fairer competition for businesses. Now, RTI, Right to Information, can take that even further, giving citizens, media and companies the legal right to request data, tender information and policy documents. Meanwhile, as Sabah prepares for its state election on November the 29th, the relevance of these reforms becomes even clearer. While RTI will not govern elections, it can help shape the environment around them, giving citizens, media and businesses a legal way to ask how public money is used, how contracts are awarded, and how decisions are made during politically sensitive periods. The question now is how Malaysia can design an RTI law that works in practice, one that strengthens trust, supports efficient administration, and builds a governance culture where openness is the norm, not the exception. Welcoming to the studios for this key discussion, Dato Dr. Punita Silvaraju, Deputy Director General for Policy and Development at the Legal Affairs Division, the Prime Minister's Department, also known as BAYU, and Pushpan Murugia, CEO for the C4 Centre. A very good morning. Thank you so much to you both for making time for this crucial discussion. How are you both doing?
Good, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Fantastic. Dr. Punita, so perhaps we can launch straight into the discussion by, of course, referencing back to some of the very fast-paced achievements that have come forth as legislation that is passed, but a lot of work that has gone behind the scenes. So we have the newly passed procurement bill, and from the government's perspective now, would you mind sharing with us how a future RTI or Right to Information law can help support this overall ecosystem, which the Madani administration is not just reimagining, but also building in real time? It's a brick-by-brick process, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tamina, for having me here to give you a little bit about our freedom of information legislation that is, I hope, will be coming up soon.
That's right.
Next year, we are looking at that. Well, first thing, if we look at the government procurement legislation itself, it's definitely one step forward for the government. It's a very progressive move, I would say, and it's also very important to look at how, it's very interesting actually to look at how government procurement is tied very closely with RTI, with what you've rightfully mentioned, the freedom of information. And it's important to actually couple both of these legislation and initiatives. And we could see that, currently without a freedom of information, if the public wants any information about procurement, it's a bit difficult for them to get that information.
That's correct.
They'll have to probably wait and may not get the information. And sometimes they could even not get it because it's official secrets to a certain extent. Now, with the RTI or with the freedom of information legislation, it makes it much easier for them. They can actually put a request for information, and if it is within the confines of the law, and if it's within, subject to the exemptions, the statutory exemptions itself, then they'll be able to get the information. So this is, to me, I think that's a progressive move for the government of the day. It also, of course, enhances transparency, accountability, because at the end of the day, the people can actually scrutinize procurement information. And I think many of us want that. So that is something that is on the table right now.
Especially in 2025, right?
Exactly.
Which brings me to the perfect segue to asking Pushpan then, of course. Civil society has, of course, been calling upon RTI for many years, but now that we also have tangible movement from the policy side, let's talk about how both government and civil society can further collaborate to ensure that it will ultimately be something utterly practical, building trust on both sides moving forth.
Yeah, I think, thanks for having me. So I think the first thing I want to contextualize is what we are facing now at this point in time. We first need to acknowledge there is a massive trust deficit that has been built up between the government and the public. So I think there is a need to find ways to reduce that and ensure that there is some form of trust building as process as well. But in order to have that working togetherness, moving forward together, we also need to identify the situation where the culture that exists at this point in time. Government departments and bureaucracy have a paternalistic view of information in that context, whereas society, we view it as information that's held on behalf. So in order for us to work together, there has to be a shift in understanding what information means. For example, information in public domain belongs to the public, but is held by the government bureaucrats as perhaps a trustee or custodian. So when that mindset can be shifted, or there's a better understanding of the role of information, I think that will help ease that working together in terms of getting a better regime of access to information. Now, the other part also I think is there's a need to have the mindset that you need to, by default, publish information. That creates a situation where, okay, fine, information out there, let's work together by using those information to expose corruption, expose wrongdoing. So that gets both sides to work together towards a common goal. And I think just to raise a point as well, we have been working closely with BIO, and I think BIO has been quite progressive in getting the input of stakeholders and CSOs to try to formulate a very strong framework to build a nice regime. And I think that is an example also how civil society plays together with the government departments to formulate good strategies. I think the other aspect that we can contribute is to how we can be a part of a component that deals with the monitoring and evaluation of the outcome itself, so it can be better progress further as well.
And RTI, of course, in essence, it ought to be a service improvement tool. So drawing from that, Dr. Punita, you had, of course, gone lightly into the fact that public procurement is one of the areas of biggest interest. To help contextualize it, especially for the audience, tell us a little more about the very rigorous and in-depth stakeholder consults that have also gone into building this framework that has led us to here today.
Okay, thank you. I think if you look at the current, the law, the legislation on government procurement, I think it already has an inbuilt governance mechanism already inbuilt in the legislation. You have procurement, you have the establishment of a procurement board, you have controlling officers, you have procurement officers, you also have an appeals board, for example, appeals mechanism, a review mechanism. So I think there's a lot of work put into the procurement legislation itself, but tying it very nicely with freedom of information is actually very interesting, because at the end of the day, number one, there are information that can be delivered to the public. For example, SOPs, for example, procurement SOPs, standard operating procedures, legislation, I would say regulations. You may have subsidiary legislations, you may have legislations that are linked with procurement. These are things that the people need to know. And for the business itself, this is very important. And for us to come to that point, as you rightfully mentioned, we had engagement. I mean, I think for freedom of information, we started way back in 2019.
That's right.
So much of effort. I think you personally was also involved with us. We actually went down to the grassroots. We actually wanted to know what are the problems. Initially, as civil servants, many of us were very skeptical with it. And I think many civil servants are also very skeptical about, FOI right now, because they don't really know what FOI is. They don't know that freedom of information is your right. It's the right of the public. So they need to know that first. So a lot of examples. We met a lot of commissioners from overseas,
right.
Right to information commissioners from many countries who actually shared the experiences with us. So these are all the things that we brought in, and finally we worked very closely with academicians, with CSOs, Pushpan's team as well, and a lot of information was gathered, and that brought us to the final policy, which was approved by Cabinet. and the drafting of the bill. And even at the point of drafting the bill, we engaged the CSOs, academicians, everyone was involved. We had a pro tem committee that was approved by cabinet, and the pro tem committee worked very closely with the government. We had other government agencies as well, especially the CGSO, who's in charge of the Official Secrets Act. We worked very closely to come up with a good bill, so which we can expect soon.
Absolutely. So expecting that soon also means that RTI can hopefully operationalize the type of parameters and common standards which the procurement bill has put into place. Pushpan, from your experience also monitoring public spending, what type of procurement information could then realistically be shared early on in RTI system?
Okay, Termina, I have to maybe depart a little bit, maybe to contextualize the Procurement Act.
Please do.
I do think that there is a progressive movement to have an act that governs procurement, but BC4 has got a stand that says that the procurement, I think, is inadequate at this point in time, and there's a lot of things that need to be put in place in order for it to be truly effective. But moving to your question, I think it's important for us to distinguish the setting within the public procurement framework. We always misunderstand that public procurement deals with tender process. It's always limited to that. In actual fact, procurement has got a bigger modalities where it deals with G2G arrangements, public-private partnerships, PFIs. These are all different kinds of modalities that very often do not fall within the ambit of a framework of a government procurement act. So in that context, if you want to say that RTI plays a role, then yes, because we can look at it as a mechanism to demand for accountability and transparency in these modalities. But when it comes to public procurement itself, I think it should be a fine distinction where public procurement should have its own governance, its own transparency nature or position that allows for public to be able to access the information. Now, what information to be accessible? Simple. Things like contract value, who are the participants, who are the specifications. And I think there also shouldn't be a distinction between defense procurement and normal procurement. Very often the argument is, oh, it's a national defense, national interest security issues. So you need to demark the
harmonizing that. Yeah. Pushpan as well as Dato, thank you so much for the conversation so far. We take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with the rest of the interview. Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight, still with me, Tamina Kausji. And today, of course, the focus is all on transparency and governance mechanisms leading up more towards it. Pushpan, let's get started off by diving deep into the political funding and election confidence. Now, of course, talk of the town is the upcoming Sabah state elections taking place later this month. There's public interest, of course, in how money moves during election periods. Let's talk about how RTI, if designed well, can also increase confidence in political funding-related matters.
Okay. It's an interesting question you ask because we are trying to, I would say, trying to fit RTI into a bigger framework. Because if you look at political funding, it's actually a topic that's on its own that needs a particular act to regulate the whole situation. Because, as we know, the biggest rationale for grand corruption or corruption along these years has always been the need to stock up money to look at election issues. You know, I mean, that's one of the arguments. So in that context, how can RTI play a role? I think first you need to demark whether political financing needs an act, which I think is important to regulate that industry by itself. RTI, even if you want to extend the scope of RTI, could extend to the stage that, okay, you need to disclose who are your donors, what amount you're getting from corporates.
But because again, that actually helps you to distinguish between state expenditure, campaign activities, right?
But I want to clarify one thing.
Sure.
We need to understand RTI purpose is the fact that goes back to information. It's information held by the government on our behalf. So whether political party information or donation information falls within that ambit of government-held information, that's where you need to be very careful how to bring them together. So I would suggest we need to have a separate topic on how to engage that topic in political financing, and how RTI should be able to play a role where the public needs information that's held by the government on our behalf.
Exactly, public sector environment around elections. Dr. Punitha, elections also, they often involve these very fast, snap decisions, and many agencies working all at once. So what type of built-in safeguards could help a future RTI function very smoothly during ongoing election periods so that the process feels fair, balanced, and most importantly, manageable for everyone involved?
Okay, well, I think firstly, I think the key word here is procedural fairness. It's very important. And for us to have some procedural guardrails wherever it's necessary. First thing is for us to ensure that there is disclosure where there is required. So we always encourage proactive disclosure when it comes to freedom of information. So if you have information that you can disclose, so that will be proactive disclosure. You do not have to wait for a request. So when it's election, if there's any information, you can actually disclose.
Pertinent,
yeah, it's pertinent. You don't have to wait for a request because that will take time. So if you could just disclose such information, then you can do it. Secondly is, I think there are many information, very preliminary information that people may want to know during elections, especially on those people who are contesting in certain constituencies, for example, about the person, you know, those who are contesting, about their assets, about their expenditures, about their political funding, you know, donations, what donations they've received, who they've received from. We don't have an act, as Pushpan rightfully mentioned, which is in the works right now by you as well. So these are things that people may want to know. Tax disclosure, for example, things like this that they may want to know, especially when they're going to make certain decisions. So when it comes to freedom of information, it's very important for the FOI officers to actually work within the time. It has to be timely. You know, you cannot take your own sweet time. You have to do it quick. And whatever requests for information, for example, has to be done without any influence. It has to be done independently and done well. So that's very important. And also all these SOPs and procedures for freedom of information or right to information with reference to election information has to be done prior to any elections, prior to a state election or the general election. All that should be dealt with much earlier so that it makes everything very smooth.
Exactly. And I think what's most important is, as you said, those holding the information, also the custodianship part of it also needs to involve a perspective on, is this relevant for the public to know? Let's release that rather than just wait on it. Now, moving closer into oversight, implementation, as well as capacity. Once again, Dato', I'd like to ask about the fact that many countries that have RTI laws, they also then appoint an independent body to help guide implementation, handle the appeals, so that the agencies at the core of it are not overly burdened. Would that be something along the pathways that Malaysia is imagining, the eventual rollout and model?
Yeah, sure. Definitely. I think we have worked very closely with the Pro-Tem Committee, as I mentioned earlier, our Pro-Tem Committee, which was established about a few months ago. And we've actually worked on the Freedom of Information law, legislation for Malaysia. So one of the pertinent issues that we've discussed is actually an oversight body for Malaysia with reference to freedom of information. So it is an entire process that we need to look at. Firstly, we're talking about FOI officers. So every agency, for example, need to have their freedom of information officers so that they are accessible to the public. So the public will can just walk into a particular agency, and if you feel that you want this information, then you just have to put a request. So there are certain procedures that we put in place. For example, you'll have to respond to the public within 3 days, for example, within 3 days. And then you have to tell them that we've received, thank you very much, we will get back to you within this time. And if it's an emergency request, there is a time span for that as well. So if you are not happy with, if there is a denial, for example, if the FOI officer comes back to you and say that we can't give you this information, then he has to quote what is the reason behind the denial. That is also embedded in the law itself. And if you're not happy, then there will be an internal review that you can put up for. And after the internal review, you can go up to the tribunal for an appeal. So we have that entire mechanism put in place. So all that is handled by the oversight body.
Absolutely. Now, perhaps just a little insight on harmonizing subnational laws, such as what we have in Selangor as well as Penang, together with the potential upcoming federal RTI. How will that be managed?
We have engaged with the two states. I think we've learned a lot from them, especially when we're coming to looking at our federal law itself. I think we've actually taken into consideration all their challenges, for example. So that's one thing that we need to look at. Second, of course, is existing laws. For example, you have the OSA, and then you have also the Penal Code, Section 203A, which penalizes civil servants for any disclosure. So these are things that we need to harmonize. We need to look at how you need to make amendments, because they need to coexist. We cannot get rid of the OSA. So they will coexist.
Coexistence, all right, for now. Pushpan, so once a potential RTI law is in place, what early signs would point towards the fact that it is indeed working in a manner that supports government systems instead of creating extra tension or burdens administratively or otherwise?
I think the best indicator would be the fact that if the government departments are willingly, by default, giving out information. So when you put information out there, it's already out there. So it reduces the element of coming, asking for information and having go through the whole process, what's the reason, cannot, yes or no. So if information is put out there, I think it actually helps us to reduce tension, and it's an indication of the fact that there is a change in mindset, that information is supposed to be shared. They're only a custodian, and we should be allowing public to have access to this information. Now, the other thing that will have a good indicator is the fact that there will be better or more in terms of trying to digitize information. There is initiative to do that, but a lot of information in the government domain are not digitized. So for RTI to actually work moving forward, you need that to be also a priority. So those indicators will actually help us say that there is a phase out where it's moving forward progressively, and I think that's important for us to monitor as well.
Exactly. Now, of course, early success indicators could, of course, include response time, compliance for whatever the parameters are. Now, just perhaps a quick rapid fire before we look towards closing out everything. If we, let's say, look 1 year ahead, Dato', what would you consider maybe a meaningful point for RTI legislation in Malaysia?
I think this is actually a major reform for us. As I mentioned, we started this in 2019. And this is a very big reform under the Madani government. And it is also a very important milestone in terms of public service delivery. Not only for, of course, for the civil servants, it's a big reform for us, and also for the public, something that you can look out for. So I think in a year's time, once we roll out the FOI legislation, what is important is response, a consistency in response. How do we respond to the public with reference to requests of information? How do we deal with exemptions? When we want to deny an information, for example, how do you deal with the exemptions within the law itself? Then how do you appeal? How do they deal with the appeal? How do they deal with exemptions within exemptions? Public interest test, the harms test. These are all very interesting, very intricate stuff that we need to look at, and that would be important elements that we will look at within this 1 year period after the rollout, I would say.
Thank you for that, Dato'. And Pushpan, in closing, just a quick insight into how exactly you feel government, together, of course, with the support of media and then civil society, can actually work together to build this culture of information sharing.
I think maybe the best thing is we need to encourage the philosophy of people knowing the business of government. They have to have an interest in what's happening with their money, with their government, and that itself will give them an interest to use tools available to extract information. But I always go back to the idea that information should be publicly available unless there is a harm justification. So for me, outcome that I like to see moving forward is there is interest of public to use the tools, especially civil society, to use the tools to actually get accountability and transparency. And also I want to see the shift in the cultural dimension where bureaucrats now will understand that they are custodians they are holding on trust on behalf of the people, and that we need to share that information for the betterment of the country.
Well put indeed. Thank you very much. That's Dr. Pudita, together with Pushpan. Well, transparency ultimately is an economic instrument as much as it is a governance ideal. We hope this helps shed light a little more on the right to information and the entire ecosystem surrounding it. I'm Tamina Kausji, signing off for now. Here's to a productive week ahead.